I want to begin this episode of Salvation South Deluxe with a discussion of the canon, and not the kind that can kill you. That canon has two N's in the middle. I'm talking about the canon with one N in the middle, the one that Webster's defines as, quote, an accepted or sanctioned list of books. Now, in the 20th century, the canon of Southern literature included the likes of William Faulkner, Harper Lee, Eudora Welty, Zora Neale Hurston, and Flannery O'Connor. But which writers' works make up the canon of Southern literature in this century? It is, of course, about 75 years too early to make a definitive list. But I can tell you a good place to start your research. It is an annual festival in Tallahassee called Word of South. For the past decade, writers and musicians have gathered in Florida's capital city to read from their works or play music. And sometimes writers and musicians get on the stage together to just, see what happens. At this year's Word of South Festival, we tried to assess the current state of Southern literature. On this episode, we're going to take you to Tallahassee with us to talk to three Southern novelists, Florida's Kristen Arnett, Louisiana's M.O. Walsh, and Mississippi's Michael Farris Smith, plus two Southern poets, both from Alabama, Jacqueline Allen Trimble and Ashley M. Jones, who is the poet laureate of her home state. And we'll also hear from a Southerner by choice, novelist Jami Attenberg, who was born in Illinois but currently resides in New Orleans. Jami calls the Big Easy the, quote, greatest city in the world, close quote, and she'll share some thoughts with us on how living in the South has uniquely shaped her writing compared to the other places that she's called home. And along the way, we will learn three things. One, that while the greatest literature of the 21st century South will cover some of the same ground as the 20th century, it will be highly different than what we got in the previous 100 years. Number two, that current Southern writing confronts realities that Southerners of the last century preferred to ignore. And finally, number three, there's no such thing in literature as an overnight success. I'm Chuck Reese, and welcome to Salvation South Deluxe, a monthly series of in-depth pieces that we add to the short commentaries of our regular podcast feed. Here on Salvation South Deluxe, we tell you some untold stories of the Southern experience and let you hear from the authentic voices that make this region unique.
I like writing because I know I need to do it. Like, if I'm not doing it, I feel terrible. Like when you're not doing that thing you're supposed to do and you feel bad. And I'm like, whenever I do it, I'm like, right, it's doing the thing I need to do.
That was the voice of a best-selling author from Florida, Kristen Arnett. Now, I have a special place in my heart for her writing because her second novel, With Teeth, was genuinely the first thing that made me laugh out loud during the depressing months of the COVID pandemic. Now, Kristen grew up in Orlando, and Jami Attenberg, an Illinois-born writer now living in New Orleans, is one of her best friends. And I want to share with you all some moments from the session they did together at the Word of South Festival.
We're like really, really good friends. Jami gave a speech at my wedding. Like, that's how good of friends we are.
Yes. My speech was like how she DM'd about her wife, Kayla, and sent me pictures.
Sorry, I love my wife so much.
Of her looking cute. I was like, look at this hot girl, basically. And I was like, great.
I consider Jami to be a mentor to me. And like any of my writing I've done has been like very much influenced by conversations we've literally had.
Same.
Like over beers or just sitting out with our dogs and stuff.
Being a writer can be like a very lonely existence, and it's really when you can find somebody who's just a huge fan of your work, and same back and forth, that like if you can find someone who will be your cheerleader, you can really build a wonderful friendship out of that.
This century's canon of Southern writing will be unlike that of the last century because many Southern writers today build their stories around queer central characters. There are few queer Southern writers who sell more books than Kristen Arnett, but there are hundreds, if not thousands of them, taking pieces of the Southern experience that were hidden in the 20th century and bringing them to vivid life in the literature of this era. But one thing that isn't changing is how Southern writers make the places where they live as important as the characters they create.
I'm from Orlando, and I love writing about Central Florida because I think it's a place that's very broad and holds a lot of different kinds of identities and people. I know people have a lot of associations with Orlando. They hear Orlando and they think immediately like Disney World or theme parks. Even if you don't work inside theme parks, you're like touched by some part of the industry. Like living in Orlando, you at least know somebody who knows somebody that's like working there doing something. It's like, right, we're like a tourism hub. So it's like, I don't know, one of those things where it's like everything kind of touches and everything feeds into each other. But it's like a hospitality industry, which means there's a lot of entertainers and performers living in Central Florida. And that means there's a lot of interesting, weird DIY creativity, which makes for like a really fun time and a lot of fun conversations.
Kristen's debut, which was called Mostly Dead Things, came out in 2019, and it hit the New York Times bestseller list, a rare feat for a first novel. And her second, the aforementioned With Teeth, was published in 2021. And distinctly different Floridian characters played central roles in those first two books.
Florida functions very differently in all of my books. The first novel I wrote, Mostly Dead Things, which was
Classic Florida novel.
that classic Florida novel. It's like a lesbian taxidermist who takes over her family's taxidermy business after her father commits suicide. But we all know that story. We've heard it dozens of times. For my second novel, I was like, this is very like suburban Florida, which is its own thing. Mommy specific suburban, like upper middle, like suburban Florida, which is everybody's living in like a suburb of something and they're just in their car all the time. So it's like a mom in a minivan moving from one house, from the school to like karate lesson to like the pool to like the groceries, the Publix or whatever to the next, and like what that smear looks like through that. And I was like, that's a way to like, this is still place without it being like me putting like my Kristen Arnett stamp on it.
Arnett's latest novel, Stop Me If You've Heard This One, features another character who is unusual in that special Floridian way.
It's called Stop Me If You've Heard This One, and it's about a lesbian birthday party clown in Orlando, Florida, who is like very obsessed with clowning and wants to take her art to like the next level and like kind of level up as an artist while simultaneously like thinking about humor and what it means to be an artist in a place that people consider to be like tacky when it comes to things. To me, the clown is very Orlando.
I've spent enough time in Orlando, and I mean outside the theme parks, to get what she's saying. This clown, Arnett says, is a lot like her hometown.
People think it's like a foolish thing, but the reality is it's like performing and doing like a lot of work. There's like so much that goes into it that people like maybe don't appreciate or see, or they might think is tacky, but it really takes like so much time and effort to like put together to like make it into that kind of thing. It's like funny in a kind of way where sometimes it's like you think the joke is for you, but then sometimes the joke is on you a little. So, and I also think it's like very playful and absurd. People have a lot of opinions about Florida anyway, just in general. The more north you go in Florida, the more south it feels a little bit. You can hear the accents kind of change a little bit. You see like the foliage change. I'm from Central Florida, and I know that there's ways in which parts of Orlando can feel like southern, like, or like what ideas of like what the South could represent or might be. I think Florida's interesting because it refuses to be nailed down a little bit. So I think, yeah, sometimes it can be like this is like the South, but also, yeah, sometimes it's its own thing. Maybe that's what makes it so interesting to write about, is that it won't let you kind of name it. It's like too squirrely. It's like a squirmy place that refuses to be like pigeonholed, maybe.
Like Arnett herself.
I mean, I grew up like very Southern Baptist. I also like grew up going to like Sunday lunch at my grandma's house with like sweet tea, and like sweet tea is the only sweet tea if there's like a bucket load of sugar inside of it. I was just like, there's like ways, like I think that there's overlap, but then there's ways in which too, it's like, yeah, like much like Florida, Kristen's kind of her own thing, maybe.
Kristen's friend and writing peer, Jamie Attenberg, was not raised in the South. She was born in Chicago. And she might not say this about herself, but I'll say it because, it's what we say about our friends who move here and stay. She wasn't born in the South, but she got here as quick as she could. Jamie is the author of 7 novels, a short story collection, and the 2022 memoir, I Came All This Way to Meet You, Writing Myself Home. In that book, Jamie details the journey of self-discovery she undertook through becoming a writer. And that journey eventually led her to New Orleans, another unique southern city, which she is now proud to call home.
I feel like I have a little bit of a quieter, slower existence in New Orleans than I had. I moved down there from Brooklyn, but I've lived all over America, and I'm originally from Chicago, born and raised. And I just was able to create just a quieter life for myself. There is something about New Orleans that, we are the Big Easy. I think that's what I was looking for. I had lived in New York City for a long time, and I just was trying to figure out where I wanted to land in my, 50s. I moved down there when I was 45 years old. I find that it's such a great starting place for me to write about places that I've lived. I've lived all over America. I grew up in the Midwest, but I've lived in Seattle. I've lived in New York. I've spent time in Portland, Oregon, and I live in New Orleans now. So that is always kind of like the centering, place is really the centering thing for me in the book. There's always a character who kind of shows me their way in, but once I figure out where they live, it feels like the whole book really opens up for me, because I can just use that landscape. Using a landscape is it's just a shortcut to a million kinds of things,
For Jamie Attenberg, a Southerner by choice, this region is a shortcut to other places and other landscapes. But the South is also a shortcut to some of the deepest flaws in the American experience. When those 20th century Southerners began exploring the South's tortured relationship with race, some, like Faulkner, were direct in their approach, and others, like Welty, were more oblique and subtle. And I sensed a hesitancy in 20th century Southern literature's treatment of race and racism, as if it constantly wondered, can we discuss this now? But in this era of Southern literature, directness is the watchword. And for me, I believe some of the most important Southern literature that directly deals with race and racism is coming from our region's poets. At Word of South, for the last few years, there has been a Salvation South stage. Our magazine works with the festival staff to program 2 days of readings and music that speak directly to Southern culture and history. This year, we invited 2 Alabama poets, Jacqueline Allen Trimble and Ashley M. Jones, to have a quote-unquote conversation in poems on the Salvation South stage. It was an eye-opening experience for the audience, who gave Trimble and Jones a standing ovation when they finished. And here's a little taste of that experience, with Jackie Trimble setting up and then reading a poem called "This Is Why People Burning Down Fast Food Joints and Whatnot."
So for Lent, I have sworn off of social media. I just, And there was a time in my life, not too long ago, where I would get into fights with people on social media. And then I said, why am I wasting my time? And so a woman who I went to college with asked a question. This was after George Floyd had died and people were doing protests. And she asked, why are people burning down the Wendy's? That was her question. And normally I would have answered her with a history lesson, but I said, I'm going to write a poem instead. So this poem is called, "This Is Why People Burning Down Fast Food Joints and Whatnot." And it has an epigram to it. In the epigram, so I also teach American literature. And so part of teaching American literature is being very well acquainted with American history. And so I always am looking for the cross sections between history and the present moment.
Trimble found that epigram, the 2 questions and answers you will hear at the beginning of the poem, in a historical document called a catechism, to be taught orally to those who cannot read, designed especially for the instruction of the slaves in the Protestant Episcopal Church in the Confederate States.
How do others sin against you? Answer, by cursing me, telling lies about me, or striking me. Question, what must you do to those who thus sin against you? Answer, I must forgive them. See, I learned my catechism well. Learned to offer my cloak and coat, my cheek again and again as the skin was splayed from my body. I can quote Martin Luther King Jr. with ease, praise the Americana of his martyrdom, the sweet, unselfish beauty of that bullet's velocity. Shall I sing, we shall overcome while I swing? I have wanted so long to believe in justice, to think of each blow as recompense for my wickedness. How can I continue? How can I continue? How can I continue to take and eat this image of myself, choke on the eloquence of my dissent, speak love fluently to someone with his knee on my neck, his bullet in my child?
The other person in this conversation and poems was Ashley M. Jones, Alabama's poet laureate. Since that position was created 95 years ago, Jones is the only African American and the youngest person ever to hold it. This is Ashley Jones's response to Jackie Trumble's poem.
I do love that poem, Jackie. I love it so much. More than anything, it's telling people like it is, which I think is necessary for us to do on a daily. And so I think I'm going to read my poem, which I think pairs well with yours. It features Dr. King as well, often misquoted, often misinterpreted Dr.
Yes.
King. This poem is one that I wrote also as a response. So I've toured across the country, and you can probably tell already I don't have a really deep Southern accent, so people don't always know where I'm from. And so when I say I'm from Alabama, people have literally asked me, "Are you okay?" And I've always said to them, well, I live in the same country you live in. I understand you think the South is somehow worse than wherever you live, but this is all America. All of us have to contend with the same issues across our country, and that has always been true. Even if you think back to the times of slavery, yes, the cotton was grown in the South, but everybody wore clothes. You know, everybody benefited from it. So this poem talks about that, and it begins with an epigraph from Dr. King. This poem is called "All Y'all Really from Alabama," because that's also true. Everybody has a secret cousin
From
who's from
Alabama.
Alabama.
Facts.
So the epigraph reads, "The straitjackets of race prejudice and discrimination do not wear only Southern labels. The subtle psychological technique of the North has approached in its ugliness and victimization of the Negro the outright terror and open brutality of the South. This here, the cradle of this here nation. Everywhere you look, roots run right back south. Every vein filled with red dirt, blood, cotton. We the dirty word you spit out your mouth. Mason-Dixon is an imagined line. You can theorize it or wish it real, but it's the same old ghost, see-through, benign. All y'all from Alabama. We the wheel turning cotton to make the nation move. We the scapegoat in a land built from death. No longitude or latitude disproves the truth of Founding Fathers' sacred oath. We hold these truths like dark snuff in our jaw. Black oppression's not happenstance, it's law."
Lovely.
I find it encouraging to hear Ashley Jones and Jackie Trumbull deliver the truth so plainly. 100 years ago, their voices would have been silenced. Salvation South Deluxe will be back after this short break. I once asked the Mississippi novelist Michael Ferris Smith a tough question. I said, say you meet somebody at a party and they ask you what you do for a living, and you tell them you write books. Now, that person's next question logically would be, what kind of books do you write? Now, how would you answer that?
I have a very difficult time answering that question. It's like when somebody says, well, what's your novel about? If you look at any one of my novels, they fall in about 7 different genres. I do take a sense of pride in the fact that I can't be pigeonholed into one category.
2 of Smith's novels, The Fighter and Desperation Road, became feature films in 2023. Smith adapted the scripts for both films from his own novels, a rare accomplishment for American novelists. Desperation Road starred Mel Gibson, and The Fighter took on a new name, Rumble Through the Dark, and it featured Aaron Eckhart.
I was a fighter. I ain't anymore.
But when Hollywood called Michael, it did force some questions about what categories he fits into.
When we started doing these movies, Desperation Road and Rumble, thriller came up for them in the pitch. I do like things with the thriller element. And I think all of my novels have that. And by that, I mean like something that feels very propulsive and like leading towards something that you may or may not be expecting.
I first met Smith when I was asked to interview him in front of an audience back when Desperation Road was published in 2017. So I've known him long enough to know it didn't bother him when Hollywood asked for some labels. He was glad they were asking for anything, because he had put in more than 2 decades of writing every single day before that happened. Back in 2011, Smith had published his first book, a short novel, a novella, called The Hands of Strangers, and that only happened after 10 years of devoting every day to writing.
Well, I mean,
that first 10 years?
Everybody else, that was a long stretch of rejection and no thank yous. I hate to use the word failure, but I guess that's what it was. I mean, I was going on years of just nothing really happening. In the meantime, I was teaching full time. I'd become the father of little girls. Time was shrinking rapidly. You know how it is. The day just shrinks up and disappears.
After the long series of rejections, when he finished his first draft of The Hands of Strangers, he thought it had a shot at being published.
I knew The Hands of Strangers was something different, and I knew it was better. So I sent it out, and all of a sudden, it was still no thank you, no thank you, no thank you, no thank you. But the rejection came. They were saying now, like, we really dig this, but there's no way I can get my publisher to publish a novella from a debut author. You have to be more established. So I was sitting there going, okay, so now it's not about the work, it's about promotion and marketing and all this, why I'm getting rejected, which was a very different kind of rejection, and it was hurtful.
It was like hearing the college professor tell you the paper you wrote was worthy of an A, but it just wasn't long enough.
And I was up in the middle of the night one night, couldn't sleep, second baby was on the way, and I just pulled up on Google like novella submissions.
Sure enough, he found a small publishing house in North Carolina that was actively soliciting novella submissions.
And I shot him an email in the middle of the night. I was telling my wife, if nothing happens in the next 6 months, by the time the school year's over, I can't do this anymore. Like, I'm tired. I can't do it. I can't keep it up. She goes, if that's what you want to do, that's fine. And like just a couple weeks later, I get this email back that says, we'd love to publish your novella if it's still available. And the funniest part of that email was, if it's still available. I was like, I don't know. Let me check. Oh, yeah. What do you know? It's still available. So I sold it to them, gave it to them. I think the first royalty check I got for that book was $23. which, I mean, that was beer money, you know, I was happy about it.
But soon after, he got a phone call from the editor of that tiny publishing house.
And he goes, "Have you seen Publishers Weekly?" And I said, why would I see Publishers Weekly? I have no reason to look at. He goes, "Hands of Strangers just got a starred review in Publishers Weekly." He goes, "I've been sending them books for 15 years. It's the first book I've ever sent them that got a star review." I was like, "All right, that's awesome." And I hung up the phone and I like Googled like 1 star. That's it. That sounds like shit to me. I didn't realize that a starred review from Publishers Weekly is like a big deal.
Later, when he finished Rivers, his first full-length novel, the results were very different.
When I sent Rivers out after this Hands of Strangers thing, I think I sent it to 5 agents. Every one of them said they wanted to read it. I picked one. Rivers was submitted to New York publishers on a Monday, and it was sold on a Friday in 5 days. I had spent 10 years waiting, rejection, depression. I quit. This sucks. I can't do it anymore. I'm going to try again. More rejection. This sucks. I quit. No, you're not. Try it again. Get up. Keep going. 10 years of that, and all of a sudden, like, it happened like that. I was an overnight success after 10 years.
Smith found his success by writing about the darker parts of Southern life. M.O. Walsh, who grew up in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and now lives in New Orleans, has gone another route.
I'm usually considered like the optimist of the group. I don't know why. It's not like I set out necessarily to always be that way. But I have friends that have known me for many years, and oftentimes after I'm saying something about life and, you know, what I think, they're like, "What's wrong with you?" You know, they're like, "What is wrong with you? Like, look around, man. It's all burning down. It's terrible." Life can be pretty good, you know, like feeling good, being in love. That's good stuff, right? And it's worth writing about. Literature doesn't always have to be about the darkest aspects of humanity. You can tell a joke every once in a while, and it's okay.
In Walsh's most recent book, The Big Door Prize, a mysterious machine appears in the grocery store in a fictional small town called Deerfield, Louisiana. The machine looks like a photo booth, but it analyzes DNA to determine a user's potential future. And this causes widespread upheaval for the town's residents.
People walk into the machine thinking one thing. It spits them out this little ticket telling them what they could be great at. If you think about just geography, where you're from, right? I've never picked up a hockey stick in my life. I'm from Louisiana. I could be great at that. Who knows, right? You can think of a million examples, right? I mean, someone who's from, you know, the upper crust of Manhattan has probably never tried yodeling, you know. There's a million reasons why you might not have tried something that you could be good at.
The Big Door Prize contemplates fate, the limits of human potential, and a world where science holds the power to reveal a person's future.
Like if you look, 23andMe and all these ancestry things, people are like, "Oh, I just send in my DNA and they'll tell me everything." We put a lot of credibility into it. And so that's sort of where the idea came from. I was like, I'm just going to have something that uses DNA to tell people something that's impossible, which is potential. Like, how in the world could you define that? But wouldn't it feel good, right, if someone could tell you? And so that's where that idea came from.
Now, a story like that could be set anywhere. A New York City bodega could easily have a machine like that, or a convenience store in another town called Deerfield, somewhere outside the South. And the challenge for Walsh was to control the potential consequences of a machine that predicted the future.
And so you got to find ways to limit it, right? And so that's when I recognize definitely small town. It's got to be a place that like gossip is, more powerful than technology,
Sounds like every small southern town I know.
It's got to feel that way, that people are talking about their neighbors and what happened to them and what readout they got.
So he created the fictional small town of Deerfield, and it was much like the towns that he knew growing up in Louisiana. To further define the narrative parameters of this story, M.O. Walsh took inspiration from one of the greatest Southern storytellers ever, the songwriter John Prine.
I love the way he writes. He is also hopeful, but can be very earnest and sad. He could break your heart, make you laugh in the same song, which is incredible dexterity and flexibility as a writer that I really admire. My relationship with John Prine's music came late in life. I was in graduate school in Tennessee, and I started dating this girl. At this time, I was learning how to play the guitar. And so she'd sit down very politely, and I would pick it up and try. And I was trying these songs that were way too hard. I don't know if y'all ever tried to play guitar. It's pretty hard, you know. She looks at me and she's like, "Don't you know any John Prine songs? Like just something simple?" I'd never heard of him in my life, right? I'd never heard of John Prine. And I was like, no. And as soon as she left, I was like, who's John Prine? Like Googling it. And so then I went and started listening to him, and I quickly fell in love with his music and mainly his writing. I just think he's one of my favorite writers. It doesn't matter the genre of all time. And so that girl is now my wife, right? So we've been married. Yeah, we've been married for over 20 years now, and we still go out on the back porch and play John Prine songs together.
When developing his characters, Walsh had a light bulb moment when he wrote a scene in which a character named Principal Pat gets a readout from the machine that says, "Carpenter." She responds, "My grandpa was a carpenter." "Grandpa was a Carpenter" happens to be the name of a song from John Prine's 1973 album, Sweet Revenge. We played you a bit of it a minute ago.
I sort of chuckled when I wrote it. I was like, hee, hee, hee. You know, that's a little inside joke for me. I'll cut it later. But once I did that, I was like, you know what? I'm going to put a couple more inside jokes in.
Now, I'm a big John Prine fan, too. So when I read The Big Door Prize, about halfway in, I figured out Walsh's inside joke. He had named the first 4 chapters after each of the 4 main characters, but after that, every single chapter's title is a snippet from the lyrics of a John Prine song.
I just leaned into it. And I was like, okay, let's go. And chapter titles, you know, like there's like almost all the chapter titles are from John Prine lyrics. There's all sorts of little hidden John Prine references in the book. I think there's over 40 of them. So if you're a big fan of his, you can find all these things.
Perhaps it was Walsh's engaging inside jokes that helped him break into Hollywood, mirroring Michael Ferris Smith's path.
My book was coming out in 2020. COVID had shut down all the theaters, right, around town. I mean, around the world, Broadway theater, all this type of stuff. And also at the same time was right when a show called Schitt's Creek had ended.
Schitt's Creek was, can't believe I'm saying that. Schitt's Creek was a Canadian sitcom starring Eugene Levy and Catherine O'Hara. And the show's hilarious final season in 2020 won every major comedy Primetime Emmy Award. And one of those Emmy winners was an executive producer and a writer named David West Reed.
And Schitt's Creek was over, and we had this very, very prolific writer who was sitting there like, I have nothing to do. What can I do? And very fortunately for me, my agent got a copy, my film agent got a copy of The Big Door Prize to him. And he read it and loved it. And he was like, oh my gosh, this will be like my new project. And so we started talking, and things sort of happened really fast, honestly.
So on March 23rd of 2023, the first episode of a series called The Big Door Prize debuted on Apple TV.
That thing will tell you your life's potential.
Where'd you get it?
No idea.
The show spanned 2 seasons, totaling 20 episodes.
Totally surreal experience, you know, seeing things cast back to you on your couch, you know, that you thought of in your pajamas 3 years before. Like suddenly you're hearing your own lines come back at you from a different writer. It was really amazing.
Unlike Smith, who wrote the movie versions of his books, Walsh wasn't involved in writing the television series, but he did visit the set. And when that happened, he got a reward that wasn't monetary.
I walk in there, and the first thing I hear is just like the sound of hammers. And then I noticed that there was 300-something people working on the show. There was carpenters, electricians. You know, like I see people building things and sanding things, and there's costume people. And I was like, all these people are like, this is how they're feeding their families. This is like, it was totally overwhelming. And so I lost it. I really lost it. And ever since, just a feeling of gratitude, like just overwhelming.
Now, if I have made Walsh sound like an overnight success, here are some facts. Walsh was in his mid-40s when the Big Door Prize became a TV series. He started writing seriously when he was in college at the University of Tennessee about 25 years earlier. I do not know what the greatest Southern books of the 21st century will wind up being. Every person you've heard on this show will be gone from this earth by then. But one thing that won't change is that the South, because it is simultaneously beautiful and ugly, will always be fertile ground for a storyteller. We have many people to thank for making this episode possible. Mark Mustian and Sarah Marchessault and Mark Striffler and many other staff members at Tallahassee's Word of South Festival. Salvation South will be there every April as long as they'll have us. And to every writer who graciously gave us their time, to Kristen Arnett for being the first person to make me laugh after many depressing months during the pandemic. Her latest novel is called Stop Me If You've Heard This One. To Jamie Attenberg for a delightful conversation and proving once again that folks from anywhere can find Southern hospitality to be so appealing that they never want to leave. Her latest novel is called A Reason to See You Again. To Jacqueline Allen Trimble and Ashley M. Jones for their beautiful verses and their fierce dedication to the truth. Jackie's latest collection of poetry is called How to Survive the Apocalypse. She has another called Joy in a Time of Elegy coming soon. Ashley's new collection, Lullaby for the Grieving, will be out only a few weeks after we release this episode, and Salvation South will publish an exclusive excerpt from it, plus an interview with Ashley on the Sunday before the book hits the stores. To Michael Ferris Smith for his steadfast contributions to Salvation South and his courageous exploration of Southern culture's shadows while revealing its hidden lights. And finally, to M.O. Walsh. The M.O. stands for Milton O'Neill, and folks who know him just call him Neil. So I want to thank Neil for loving John Prine's music as much as I do and for writing 2 books that have brought me joy. Although I do have to say that last summer, Salvation South published one of the darkest fictional short stories we've ever published, called Meet Me There, and the name at the top of it was M.O. Walsh. The first line of the story was, "The sick coward Simon lived on a weak little neck of the Tickfaw River, and we were to bring him the trouble, make him confess, watch him shiver." I suggest you look that one up and read it. You've been listening to Salvation South Deluxe, proudly produced in cooperation with Georgia Public Broadcasting and its network of 20 radio stations around our state. Every Wednesday, we add a new 3-minute commentary about Southern stuff to our podcast feed, and every month, we add longer deluxe stories such as the one we just told you. I'm Chuck Reese, your host and the editor-in-chief of Salvation South, which you can find 24/7 at salvationsouth.com. We put out a new edition every Sunday. Our producer is Jake Cook, who also composed and performed our theme music. GPB's director of podcasts is Jeremy Powell, and none of this could happen without wonderful people like GPB's Sandy Malcolm, Adam Woodleaf, and Burt Wesley Huffman. We'll be back next month with another full-length episode of the Salvation South podcast.